You may have heard about a recent story involving missing Lego Star Wars collection worth an estimated $200,000. If not, congratulations on successfully avoiding internet drama. And don't worry, this video isn't about the drama. This video is about the automation lessons every small business can learn from this. So I will not be assigning blame, taking sides, or saying anybody did anything wrong, or trying to solve the mystery. What caught my attention was a wonderful video by CoffeeZilla, where he broke everything down and interviewed all of the people involved and let them tell their side of the story. I put a link to this video down in the description if you want the full story. But what CoffeeZilla showed was that at the center of the dispute are multiple versions of what happened. More interesting, to me at least, multiple spreadsheets. What struck me wasn't who I thought was right or wrong. It was that everything seemed to be relying on systems that were difficult for anyone to trust, and how a lot of this could have been avoided with some simple automation practices. Okay, so a quick recap of what we know so far, so that everybody is on the same page. A private collector wanted to sell his very large Lego Star Wars collection. A local store that sells Legos agreed to a consignment deal with him. They would sell the sets and then pay him when the sets sold, with them keeping a portion of the sales price. A very standard consignment agreement. However, the ownership of the store changed hands. Again, the drama around that is not what I'm interested in. What I am interested in is at some point during this transition, a significant portion of the collection could no longer be accounted for. And that's where the drama starts, and I'll end. Now I want to look at things from a process and automation perspective. More specifically, it's what happens when a business grows beyond the system it was using to track inventory and sales ownership, and how some simple automation could have helped prevent this situation from ever happening, or at least made it much easier to determine what actually happened. Problem is, when people disagree, you need a source of truth. Without one, every discussion becomes an argument. Every discrepancy becomes a mystery, and every missing item becomes a detective story. And there are two scenarios from CoffeeZilla's video that I want to discuss. The first is manual bookkeeping, and the second is asset tracking. The manual bookkeeping and the gaps in asset tracking cause a lot of distrust of the data. And once trust in data disappears, everything gets harder. Questions become, was the inventory sold? Was it entered correctly? Was it updated? Did somebody forget something? Or did somebody mistype something? And then once your trust in your data disappears, everything gets harder. And again, I'm not here to point fingers or blame on anyone. I'm especially not saying anyone did anything wrong. I'm just here as Captain Hindsight to help you from ever ending up in a situation like this yourself. Now, I want to preface this with, I don't think Excel is evil. I use Excel on a daily basis, and it's a perfectly good application, especially for small businesses. And that's perfectly reasonable. And the problem isn't Excel. The problem was the human integration leg. Every time a person copies data from system A to system B, you're creating a potential failure point. It doesn't matter what system A and system B are. It could be SAP and Oracle, or Square and Google Sheets. And the problem remains the same, the human element. Now, this is a simplified example inspired by recent events. All right, so imagine a consignor drops off a Lego set, employee enters it into a spreadsheet, items get displayed, a customer buys it, the point of sale records the sale, an employee manually updates the spreadsheet, employee emails the consignor comes to collect the money, an employee updates payout records. Now, ask yourself, what happens if somebody forgets to update the spreadsheet after the record of the sale? Suddenly, the spreadsheet says something exists, the point of sale says it's sold, the consignor is asking for his money, and the owner is wasting valuable time investigating all of this. One misupdate can create multiple conflicting realities. The interesting thing is that nothing here required malicious intent. It only required a process that depends on people remembering to update multiple systems every single time something happens. So how can you fix this? And I'm here to tell you, you don't need a multi-million-dollar ERP system to solve this. Just some simple automations. Every automation starts with a trigger and initiates actions. For the point of sale system, whenever a sale occurs, have it trigger a workflow. Unless you're using a vintage cash register with one of those pull arms on it, right, I guarantee you there is a workflow platform that integrates with your point of sale software. And now nobody has to remember to update something. Right? The sale itself becomes the trigger. You can have that workflow go and update the spreadsheet, automatically mark the item as sold, record the sales price and the time, the employee who entered it, and most importantly, the transaction number so that you can trace it back. Or if you don't even go that far, simply just have it send an email with those details. Now, if you forget to manually update the spreadsheet, at least you have something to go back and look at. And speaking of email, you can also have it automatically notify the consignor when an item sells. Just a simple notification that says, your item sold. Sale amount, $85. Transaction, 12345. Date, June 10th. It could be an email, SMS, automated report. Now everybody sees the same event at the same time. More importantly, two people now have this record. And if there's a dispute, all sides will have records they can agree on. But selling inventory isn't the only place where things can disappear. Sometimes an item hasn't been sold at all. Sometimes it's simply moving from one location to another. In CoffeeZilla's video, there's a ton of confusion between sets that were in a store, in a safe, in off-site storage, and conflicts on dates where sets were moved from one store to another to a completely unrelated store in unrelated storage. And it was a huge mess. So a lot of businesses track in store, in storage, sold, but not in transit. And that can create blind spots without even realizing it. Now your data may not be as credible. This is something that postal services, FedEx, and UPS, companies like that, solved decades ago. Not with magic, with scans. Package leaves a warehouse, scan. Package loaded on a truck, scan. Package arrives at a local facility, scan. Package goes out to delivery, scan. A package gets delivered, believe it or not, scanned. Shipping companies did not implement this to make those fancy trackers for you to continue the refresh while you're waiting for your new toy. They did it so that any moment they could answer, where was this item last seen? And that's incredibly powerful. And for a small business, you don't need a fancy tracking system with GPS to get the exact coordinates of the package, but a simple system that has 3 states: storage, in transit, and store. You also don't need special equipment for this. There are iOS and Android apps for scanning and logging UPC codes. When an employee moves an item, scan it, select a destination, and the system records the timestamp. The status becomes in transit. When it arrives, scan the item again. Status becomes in store. Right? Now there's never any ambiguity. You don't need GPS, you don't need RFIDs, you just need a scan at departure and arrival. But knowing where an item is now is only part of the story. Eventually someone is going to ask, how did it get here? And that's where immutable logs become incredibly valuable. Records in an immutable log can be added, but they cannot be altered. Right? Think of a bank statement. You don't edit yesterday's transactions, you add new transactions today. Even when you return an item to the store, your bank doesn't erase the purchase transaction, they just add a new deposit transaction. Once it has been entered, it is there to stay. Right now, you have two parties saying, well, my spreadsheet says this, well, my spreadsheet says that. And now you're arguing about whose spreadsheet is less wrong. With an Excel sheet, people are manually updating, and they are setting status columns to the most recent state. What this does not include is the ability to track and audit the history of it. You don't know when each column in the spreadsheet was updated, or who made what update and why. I mean, I could just go make a spreadsheet myself right now and put any data in there that I wanted. But what you have with an immutable log is a record of each and every change. So you have inventory comes in, it's marked this day as in store. Someone moves it to storage, you'll have new records showing the date and time that that happened. It gets moved back to the store, another entry. It gets placed on hold for customer, another record. It gets put on layaway, another record. Sold, another. Or it could be that this item was returned or this item was sent to this other store. What you have is a full audit history. You know where it was at every single point in time. And let me tell you, if you show that to someone over an Excel spreadsheet, you're going to have a ton more credibility. Now, sticking with the theme of immutable logs, I always ensure that every automation I make includes immutable audit logs. This way, if something goes wrong in the automation process, I have a record. So not only do I have a log of exactly what each automation did along the way, if it fails, you can manually intervene and it makes troubleshooting much easier. And a good audit log should tell a complete story. If I hand the record to somebody who wasn't there, they should be able to understand exactly what happened, who did it, when it happened, what changed, why it changed, without needing to investigate anything. And that's the difference between data and evidence. A good log record should contain the timestamp of when the action occurred, event type, what happened, trigger, why did the automation run, and the subject or object, what was affected, the previous state and the new state. Most importantly, you want the correlation ID and the transaction ID to tie multiple actions together. One sale may generate inventory updates, emails, consignments, payouts, audit records, right? And this transaction ID connects them all together. And then you also want to have the actor, right, who caused the change, because one of the first things during an investigation you're going to get asked is, well, who made this change? And then the source system, where did the event originate from? Which becomes incredibly useful when systems disagree. And then also the status, not just what happened, but what was the result? Did it succeed or did it fail? If it failed, why? And for inventory specifically, you'll want, location, from, to, quantity, ownership, those type of things. And last, but certainly not least, the reason or comments, right? This will save you countless hours later on. Reason, customer return, reason, damaged packaging, reason, ownership transfer. Without context, logs become status changed. With context, status changed because customer returned item. It's a huge difference. I like to use the analogy that a spreadsheet is like a photograph, and an immutable log is like security camera footage. One tells you where things look like at a point in time. The other tells you how they got there. If you watch CoffeeZilla's video, you may notice how often discussions come down to, I remember, I was told, I think, and that's completely normal. Humans do this. People's memories drift, processes change, people leave, months pass. I can tell you that I had pizza for dinner last night. Shout out to Wing Bear Pizza in Simsbury. Yet I have absolutely no idea what I had for dinner last Thursday. But you know what? I bet my wife does. Not because she has something like high superior autobiographical memory, because she plans our meals for the week and writes it down in a notebook. She doesn't erase the previous week. She just flips the page. She is essentially creating an immutable log. And that's what automation does. Automation creates evidence because computers will happily record at 1:57 p.m. Janet moved item for 5432 from storage to store. Then at 2:14, Steve received the item at store. And it does this every single time without getting tired, distracted, or trying to remember what happened 6 months ago. The lesson that I took away from this whole situation is that businesses can't rely on human memory alone. But the best part is that implementation of these ideas is more accessible than ever. 10 years ago, building these kind of integrations often meant hiring a developer and writing a bunch of custom software. Today, platforms like Make, NAN, Power Automate, Zapier allow small businesses to build surprisingly sophisticated workflows with little to no code. And you don't need $1 million ERP system. Sometimes a barcode scanner and a few well-designed automations are enough to dramatically improve accountability and visibility. Because when something goes wrong, the most valuable automation isn't the one that saved you the most time. It's the one that creates the evidence you wish you had later. So thanks for coming along with me on this interesting ride. I generally hope the truth comes out in the end and that everybody involved gets a fair resolution. However, if you're interested in hearing me go more in depth on any of these topics discussed, please leave a comment down below letting me know. And as always, until next time, keep building, stay curious, and automate the boring parts. Because sometimes you never know when you might need them as evidence.